Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to our al-Hajj nights. Tonight we're honored to have Imam Baytullah with his beautiful voice. Faddal, Ustaz.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وكذلك أنزلناه آيات بينات وأن الله يهدي من يريد. إن الذين آمنوا والذين هادوا والصابئين والنصارى والمجوس والذين أشركوا إن الله يفصل بينهم يوم القيامة إن الله على كل شيء شهيد. ألم تر أن الله يسجد له من في السماوات ومن في الأرض والشمس والقمر والنجوم والجبال والشجر والدواب وكثير من الناس وكثير حق عليه العذاب ومن يهن الله فما له من مكرم إن الله يفعل ما يشاء. هذان خصمان اختصموا في ربهم فالذين كفروا قطعت لهم ثياب من نار يصب من فوق رؤوسهم الحميم يصهر به ما في بطونهم والجلود ولهم مقامع من حديد كلما أرادوا أن يخرجوا منها من غم أعيدوا فيها وذوقوا عذاب الحريق. إن الله يدخل الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار يحلون فيها من أساور من ذهب ولؤلؤا ولباسهم فيها حرير. صدق الله العظيم.
Sheikh Yusuf Baytullah's recitation was very nice. It reminded me that before I begin the translation, yesterday I was reading an interview with Karen Armstrong, and she said reading the Quran's translation is not reading the Quran. She goes, the Quran is meant to be recited and heard.
Subhanallah.
And even in our own little preparations for this discussion, I noticed that I really connected with the page when he recited it, because that's the real Quran. Everything else falls in the shadows.
Subhanallah.
Welcome, Sheikh Yusuf, and welcome to everyone, inshallah. Let's continue. We're continuing from verse number 16. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It is in the face of such rage and malice that we send down the Quran in messages clear in meaning and content, and as manifest signs of the truth, and God guides whomever He wills. One, Allah yahdi man yurid. No, I think this would be incorrect Arabic, and there might even be takalluf into it. But when I was learning Arabic and verses like this I would read, I would always wonder whether the man yurid if the man could apply not to the fa'il, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the one seeking hidayah. But that's, I think, a bit of a stretch.
I know, actually, that's what the, here in the Mawsu'ah, al-Qur'aniyya, that's actually the position that they take.
Really? How do they...
وأن الله يهدي ابتداء من يريد هداية. So they take that position.
Okay,
and
so it's not incorrect Arabic to think of it like that, because the man, normally you would say it goes to the one who's been most recently mentioned, which over here is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it can apply to God guides whomever seeks guidance.
Yes, that's a more, in reality, if you look at the context of the page itself, that falls in line with the general meaning. Otherwise, the understanding which we find in amongst the scholars of Ilm al-Kalam, especially the Ash'ari school, they put a lot of emphasis on the qudra of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. And so the issue of irada and free will, they get into those types of debates a lot on the issue of the qadr of Allah.
Yeah.
And so it becomes so dominant, their arguments with regard to Allah being, powerful, all independent, and so on and so forth. Sometimes those arguments overshadow the individual's role. And so here it's not like that. Here the meaning, or one of the meanings that can be put forward is that the human being in many ways has to demonstrate a willingness. The submission, it can't be forced. And we know that a person's Islam is not accepted under coercion.
Yeah.
So here, even when we look at the ayat that follow, there's a difference between the human being and the rest of the creation. The rest of the creation is under like a coercion, but the human being is distinct from the rest of the creation because of this issue of irada or will. So you can make it, I think that you can make that argument.
Yeah.
In that way.
I guess this again, brothers, sisters will realize, I just read Ali Unas translation, and God guides whomever He, capital H, He wills. And when you read a translation, you're only reading one interpretation of it. Okay, let's continue. Now another interesting verse. Verse 17, those who truly believe, and those who have become Jews, and the Sabians, and the Christians, and the Magians, the Majus, and those who associate partners with God, in brackets is God here, without having any relation with a divinely inspired religion, God will certainly judge between them on the day of resurrection. God is witness over everything.
Yeah, and that to kind of go back to your point, if we were to read it in the way that you mentioned early, the first ayat that we begin with, then the dominance of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala manifests itself in that is, that on the day of judgment, those who follow Tawheed, they would fall in line with Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, and those who didn't, they receive the punishment. But then also guidance is with Allah. You know what I'm saying? That al-muwafaqah comes from Allah, that, Allah's acceptance, is something that we're seeking to gain, and that we as human beings are, forever weak and forever needy, and Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala is the one that we depend on and not the opposite. Those two plays are there.
Yeah.
We don't want to necessarily write off the other play. It's those two meanings are there. And because what we're doing is reflecting on the Quran. And so then when you think about it from that angle, you know what I'm saying, the wisdom of Allah, the dominance of Allah, it should bring something into our hearts of fear and a wanting, to fall within the shade of the mercy of Allah. And then from the other angle, as I mentioned, is one of learning how to be responsible agents, or learning how to be individuals that are accountable. And that is the idea of Yawm al-Qiyamah. Thinking about the Day of Judgment is that we have that impressed on our minds.
Yeah.
Allahu A'lam, yani.
No. It's interesting. It finishes on that God is witness of everything. His ism Shaheed is mentioned here
Yes.
because he witnesses all these groups. For me, the biggest thing about these verses in that second sentence, Inna Allah yafsilu baynahum yawm al-qiyamah. God will judge between them, or differentiate between them, or separate them on the Day of Judgment. And who's going to do that? Allah's going to do that. Sometimes as Muslims we have a tendency, due to our understandings of our creed or our certain verse of the Quran, without realizing we fall into the dangerous trap of pretending to judge on behalf of people. But also this verse is not similar like other verses. There are verses like in Surah Baqarah that says whether you're a Jewish, Christian, or a Sabian, if you believe in God and the last day. I'm just paraphrasing the verse. You have la khawfun alayhim wa lahum yahzanun. There's nothing to fear and nothing to be upset. This is not saying, it's not giving a sentence saying, like, it's not leaving that they might be fully saved. They're not doing anything wrong, because clearly we have the Majus being said here, and this is the only time in the Quran they've been mentioned. And there are different opinions about them, but the dominant one is the fire worshipping Persians. And some people will, there have been slight fiqh issues of can they be considered Ahl Kitab from certain angle,
Right.
but the predominant opinion is no, they're not.
Right.
So those other verses give more like, perhaps there's a chance for them, and there's debates about this contemporary times. A lot of people, but I think the best way to stay away from all these debates is just leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. Do you ever consider that all who are in the heavens and all who are on the earth prostrate themselves to God? And so do the sun, the moon, the stars, the mountains, the trees, and the beasts. And so do many among human beings. But many others are deservedly condemned to punishment. Whoever God humiliates can have none to give him honor. Assuredly, God does whatever he wills. And this is one of the verses that require prostration. And right, Ustaz Sheikh Yusuf, we can do this inshallah later. The only surah that has two sajda verses is Surah Hajj, but obviously as we know that one of them, the Hanafi say you don't have to do it, the other one, the Shafi say you don't have to do it. But this is one of those verses. Sheikh Yusuf, what's the connection? What's happening here? We have discussion being mentioned about these different groups, and now prostration to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then we're going to have a quite very explicit and vivid description of hellfire and the torments that's awaiting. The mind can wonder what's the hidden connection between these verses. What comes to you?
There's a lot of duality in terms of imagery that is being put forward. The believers, the unbelievers, those who seek guidance, those who don't seek guidance, or those whom Allah wills to guide, those whom Allah does not will to guide. There's a reality of the current existence on the earth, what comes after. There's the night and the day. There's the scenario of the two parties that dispute. There's the play on the two types of dress that will be worn either by the believer or the unbeliever. So the dress of the disbeliever will be the hellfire, whereas the dress of the believer will be the more finer things of life on the day of after Yawm al-Qiyamah, so to speak, or the day after, the life after the day of standing, or the day of account. So you see this play between the two realities. And those two realities manifest themselves in different ways in these examples. Reality of Iman and Kufr. And one of the things that's clear is the idea that the universe itself is in a state of Islam. And the human being has that potential because the human being is part of the universe. There's part of us that will continuously be in the state of Islam. But the issue which has to be addressed is, will the human being submit willingly to Allah? So some people on earth willingly submit and other people, they don't. And so you have that play, that's connecting realities together, whether it's the reality of the universe or the reality of the seen with the unseen, the reality of submitting an Iman and its opposite and so on and so forth. That's maybe what we can say is some of the points that are being brought out.
Yeah, thank you. I like that point, that play on duality. The verse says, Alam tara, like it's as if, and the previous verse just finishes by saying God is a witness of everything. And then it says, Alam tara, don't you see? Almost saying that we should be witnessing
Yes.
the sajda of all these beings.
Yes.
Right? That's the type of iman we should be aiming to have. With this verse, it says, Man fis samawati wa man fil ard.
Yes.
In other verses, it says, Ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard. I personally, I think each one of those different ma and man, which is whatever or whoever,
Yes.
there's wisdom in that. Although some of the commentators, whenever they see ma fi samawati, whatever's in the heavens, they translate it as man. But I personally am of the opinion that it's literal.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I don't believe in synonyms in the Quran.
That's right. I mean, they probably don't believe in synonyms too, but they might have a way of saying, like the ma is mentioned,
Yes.
but the man is intended.
Yeah, and that's where they do the synonyms. That's where it becomes. What happens is that the whole issue of the synonyms in the Quran, the language of the Quran, we as human beings, we use synonyms. The Quran is using the language of human beings, but the Quran is the speech of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala.
Yeah.
So you have a position which says that we have to look at the context. Allah intentionally uses certain words over other words.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And so that intentionality and that purposefulness points to shades of meaning which are lost
That's right.
when we make one word equivalent with the other word and we just kind of write it off thinking that there's no subtlety meaning.
Yeah. So in here, man fi samawat is saying whoever, and often it's said that the angels, for example, in the heavens. And man fil ard, you might say it includes the intelligent beings on earth, which would be again the angels and the jinn. Humans could be included, but then humans are going to be talked about. So most likely humans are not intended in the beginning of that verse. But then after the earth, it says, and the sun and the moon and the stars, and then the mountains and the trees and the beasts. There it's not man fil nujum wa man fil shams wa man fil kham. It is the sun itself, the moon itself. And we know Surah Rahma wa najmu wa shajaru yasjudan and wa shamsu wal qamaru, they're all making sajda in a way. And subhanAllah, sometimes it reminds us of that famous hadith that the Prophet speaks about the sujood of the shams. But it caused a lot of difficulties for many scholars because of the physicality of that. But perhaps,
that's an important point.
But
I think that deserves a pause. That deserves a pause. Because that hadith has created some stumbling blocks in contemporary scholarship because of what we know of physics.
That's right, yeah.
Do we have to take that hadith literally indicating laws of physics, or is it indicating the metaphysical reality or the relationship of that creation to Allah and how we should understand that creation, being in an act of worship?
Yeah, yeah.
That language is relevant to the people of that time, but it doesn't make it irrelevant to our time just because on this point there's some differences scientifically. it's not necessarily, what is the intent there? Is the intent for us to gain scientific import or meaning, or is the intent for us to understand that the sun is the creation of Allah and is worshiping Allah?
That's right.
See what I'm saying?
And the Quran is focusing on the spiritual side of it.
So I don't think that, because some people have called that hadith to question to the point of saying that it should be rejected.
Yeah.
And that's not a type of hadith which in reality causes any harm. It could be integrated with the scientific fact, and knowing that there's two parallel types of knowledge. One here,
Yes.
there's scientific knowledge, and then on the other side, there's the metaphysical knowledge. They don't have to agree 100% in detail.
That's right. And some have said the two worlds, the mulk and malakut.
Yes.
So the sun does things, but the angels that are responsible and witnessing, like the Quran is calling us to witness the sun's sajda. But the angels that witness the sajda of the sun, they take this witnessing and they present it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, but the sun itself, see, I would be, so I believe the angels are witnessing the prostration and the worship of the sun. But the sun itself is worshipping God as well in a unique language, like the Quran says, in a language that you do not understand,
And to be honest with you, Sheikh, like when you look at the sun, it's setting.
Yeah.
When you look at what you see, it's setting.
Yeah.
The scientific fact tells us that it's not setting.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying?
We going around.
But what we see at that level with the limitation of our eye, it is setting. What we're able to see beyond the limitation of our eye through knowledge and mathematics teaches us another reality.
That's right.
So either we're going to say that the setting is an illusion too, just to, make the scientific fact make sense to us.
That's right.
Or we're going to have to combine between the limitation of what the eye sees and the scientific fact. I don't see why we don't play off of the limitation of our eye, right? We say, okay, that's what we see. It has this limitation. But this is the meaning that we get in the Quran. We have a limited eye, and then science teaches us there's some rules also that are operational. I don't see why we can't integrate all of that in its proper place.
And each perspective has its own worth, value.
Yes.
Seeing it set is beautiful itself.
Yes.
And there's no one can deny that there's artwork in that. And there's
And
we're talking about artwork, then what's even beyond artwork is the spiritual stuff that's going on, the worship. And that's what the Quran is pointing to.
Right. And that part will be missing if we just looked only at the scientific.
If you just look at the scientific laws, But the scientific laws are very interesting as well, because some have interpreted the sajda of the shams and all these heavenly bodies as following God's laws, like you said, willingly or unwillingly.
Yes.
But another verse of the Quran, they say, we come to you willingly. So that's another type of sajda that everything is under. But when it comes to the human beings, it's interesting how it doesn't, it's not like Surah Waqiyah, what says, ثُلَّةٌ مِّنَ الْأَوَّلِينَ وَقَلِيلٌ مِّنَ الْآخِرِينَ.
Yes.
It says kathirun for both. So it doesn't leave you in hope. I mean, it doesn't put you in despair.
Yes.
But I mean, our job is to just reflect on some of the translation, not go into the tafsir of it. But it mentions how wrong of human beings to refuse to do sajda. Because just before human beings,
Al-Waqi'ah was revealed in what period,
I presume Meccan, but
we can come back to that, because this is no doubt, there's debates on the period of revelation with one of the most
but last week you
relied on is that it's mixed between Mecca and Medina.
Yeah, that's right.
And then do you remember what we mentioned? We talked
a bit
about
of both.
last week. A bit of both, and then they say it's the last phase of Mecca, the earliest phase of Medina.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about contextual reality, is a lot of people have come into Islam by this point.
That's right.
Right? But still, now what you're talking about here is you're talking about other communities other than just Quraysh. The Quran now is addressing the Nasara.
Yeah.
The Quran is addressing the Majus. You see what I'm saying? The Quran is addressing the followers of Musa. So now there's a recognition of other communities that may not have Tawheed in full, right? And so if you think about it literally from a dawah perspective, there's a lot of people still that have not entered Islam, and there's a lot of people that have entered Islam. I'm not saying that that's what the meaning is, But I'm saying that we could draw a correlation between the historical reality of what was taking place in that time period.
But yeah, so everything, all these heavenly giant bodies are doing sajda to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even in the beasts and from human beings. But a lot of them, it doesn't say a lot of them don't do sajda. Because if you take the tafsir of this could means their sajda is by following the God's laws, then every cell in our body,
Yes, exactly.
whether you're a mu'min or a kafir,
Yes.
every cell in your body is doing sajda.
Yes.
Your heart is doing sajda.
Yes.
So it doesn't say they don't do sajda, but it just says they deserve the punishment. And then may Allah protect us. Apart I think there's a prophetic dua, Allahumma krimna wa la tuhinna. Whoever Allah debases, none can. And subhanAllah, it's coming straight after sajda. The biggest source of our honor and izzah is sajda, to be in line with the universe. When we refuse to do sajda, which is when we refuse to put our heads down, then we're really debased. A'udhu billah. Verse number 19. These two groups, in brackets, those who prostrate to God and those who do not. Though there may be difference of approach within either group, they contend about the truth concerning their Lord. As for those who disbelieve by categorically denying Him or associating partners with Him in His attributes or authority as the Lord, this was all in brackets. So as for those who disbelieve, garments of fire are certain to be cut out for them, with boiling water being poured down over their heads, with which all that is within their bodies, as well as their skins, is melted away. For them are also goads and maces of iron. I think another translation would be iron hooks, right? Could be. Whenever in their anguish they attempt to come out of the fire, they will be returned into it and told, taste the punishment of the scorching fire. Allahumma ajirna min an-nar, min adhab al-hariq. No. Very vivid, Sheikh Yusuf.
Yeah, and if you pay attention, the translation that you put forward initially when you're talking about وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَن يُرِيدُ. If you also look at the contextual reality, you can read it from that angle, and that the inhabitants or the denizens of the hellfire, even if they wanted to extricate themselves or free themselves or liberate themselves, or for that to stop, they wouldn't be able to. And so the reality of
the irada that this verse is saying, kullama uridu.
Yes. The dominance of the irada of Allah, it's made clear. And so it's like Allah puts forward what is beneficial to us, and then as a consequence of our deeds in terms of where our heart is going, we're either going to be on the side of gaining the pleasure of Allah or not gaining the pleasure of Allah. But here, the denizens of hell is, what their response is in terms of how the Quran is describing what they will, what they want. It is showing the dominance of Allah. They won't be able to escape that.
That's right. I mean, one, it shows that firstly they can't escape it and how desperately they want to escape it. But also, kullama, it's as if perhaps they want to escape it more than once. Not just want, they probably try. But I didn't connect that irada. Like Allah was saying, look, I'm just calling you to do sajda.
Yes.
It's not something too big. Things much greater than you is doing sajda. The heavens, the moon.
Yes.
The beasts even. And, sometimes we think we're more honorable than the beasts. But if we don't do sajda, then Allah believes a threat. Before this discussing, I was actually thinking, I had some questions, what are the connections? But just during this discussion, it's very vivid.
What?
Like here is the, ahsan al-taqweem.
Yes.
Do sajda. If you don't, asfala safilin. Automatically.
That's beautiful.
And the two groups, like you said, the duality, straight away comes after. Can
you explain that in English? Because some people may not have gotten the subtlety of what you were talking about. If you accept taqweem.
you know, like at that point, like the verse about the sajda is talking about those of the highest of the high, ahsan taqweem, or
Sajda being the prostration.
the sajda being the prostration, and when you're in sajda, you're closest to God,
Right.
and you're at the highest level. You know, there's a hadith that the honor of the believer is tahajjud prayers.
Right.
But if you leave that honor, then automatically you're on the lowest of the low. But it's leaving it with that irada that you mentioned and highlighted, you know. But the irada of the hellfire is being pointed, but in the Jannah, the irada is not even irada. The moment they want something, it's there present for them.
Yes.
So their irada increases.
Yeah, it doesn't
Allah
have
rewards it, doesn't have limits.
It doesn't have limits in here. That's a excellent, that's a mashallah beautiful.
But in hellfire, I got it from you. In hellfire, they want to speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ikhsa'u, call upon the Malik, so we just die. There's no death after today. It's very, very,
Yeah, that's what you mentioned. Another point, the asfal safilin, that point as well.
There is a narration about these two groups that one of them, some of the tafsir scholars, the early tafsir scholars saw it as, I think it was the Mubaraza, the before the fighting, the Muslims would send 3 people, and then the Quraysh sent 3 people, and these 3 people were Sayyidina Ali, Hamza, radiallahu anhu, and Ubayd ibn al-Harith, and then 3 from the Quraysh. But then you could have mu'min and non-mu'min. It could include all those meanings. Muradillah, he's more encompassing than any particular tafsir may have it. But if it is the Battle of Badr, I mean, that's one battle that you say was haqq was batil.
Yes.
You know, there's no munafiq in the Battle of Badr in the Muslim side. And I mean, with all due respect to some of the companions who were participating on the Quraysh side, but those 3 people was literally hadani khasmani ikhtasamu.
Yes.
And that's a great honor for Sayyidina Ali and Hamza radiallahu anhu, and he, the third
So
one,
those 2 disputants were disputing, in other words.
that's right, they're actually disputing.
Yes. And then you were saying that that could apply to the Battle of Badr.
That's some of the tafsir things. I don't know if your one has mentioned it. We looked at it, right?
But the one that I have mentioned, the idea that the 2 disputants here is referring to the believers and the disbelievers arguing with each other about the reality of who Allah is and so on and so forth. And
I think
what comes forward as far as what we should be believing in Iman.
yeah,
They argue about these points like the day of Yawm al-Qiyam or who Allah is. And
that's right. Also, Ustad Ali Unal has taken your point about the duality, because he's connected the 2 groups straight to the duality of the previous verse. Some of the humans who prostrate, but some of the humans who deserve hellfire. Just something you reminded me about the prostration. There's a verse in Surah al-Haqqa or Surah Mi'raj. I think it's al-Haqqa. They're called to do sajda, but they won't be able to. فَهُمْ لَا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ. But before it says they were called to do sajda, وَهُمْ سَالِمُونَ, but they didn't. With these verses of hellfire, you know, sometimes it is extremely hot, obviously.
yes.
But it's also not so extremely hot that you just disappear, right? The Quran talks about the skins being renewed. So it's hot to the level where you feel it, from what I see here, at the maximum, but not so when you start losing your senses and you start feeling it. May Allah protect us. Just the other day,
Where you stop feeling it, right?
like it doesn't get so, like it's hot where, it's very hot obviously, but it's burning, it's a punishment. But it's not to a level where you start losing your senses. Your senses are replenished just so you can.
Yeah, the amazing point of that is the way the Quranic descriptive about the skin and what we know about the skin
That's
as
right.
being the largest organ, and for it is our shield between, you know, the internal selves and external self, but how it allows us to be able to experience.
Yeah.
You know, that's very, you know, profound in terms of even the body itself at this point. You know, the body at this point becomes the means by which, you know, we, in this world, we were enjoying it in pleasure and in sin and so on and so forth. And then in the next world, may Allah protect us from that fate, you know, it becomes the means for our own punishment.
Yeah. But subhanAllah, I just realized something. So what is being melted is the skins, but even inside your body.
Yes, in this one it mentions this point.
Inside your body.
This
So
this
somehow the fire is reaching the internal.
Yeah.
But you don't die. You don't die. But you're.
The punishment, you're maintained in the state of punishment.
But the internal bodies are also like the. I mean, I read it as the internal organs.
Yes.
But
yes.
Obviously, I'm sure some of the tasawwuf scholars would see the internal, like the emotional side.
A'udhu billah.
A'udhu billah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, to finish it off. On the other hand, God would admit those who believe and do good, righteous deeds into the gardens through which rivers flow, adorned therein with armbands of gold and pearls, and their garments therein will be of silk. So after, tanthir, this tabshir, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
May Allah allow us to be from the people of Sajda.
Ameen. Previously we mentioned the internal music of the Quran, or at least the sound of the letters. I've noticed a consistent theme when it comes to the punishment in hellfire. The letter Sad is yusharu, yusabbu, isluha. There's a lot of Sad. And then, but in the Jannah verses, you can hear the lightness. And there's going to be clothings of gold and pearls and silk. All right, Sheikh Yusuf, inshallah, we continue this, and I like it how we also discuss this page after these classes, and inshallah the brothers and sisters can do that too. They can finish this, turn this off, and just read the surah, that page again, and whoever they're sitting with at home, they just discuss it with them. What did you get from this? What did I get from this?
And make sajda.
And make sajda. Let's make sajda. Jazakumullah. Jazakumullah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.